Here we go. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining VCSQI's first official meeting of the Opioid Management Workgroup. And Eddie was quick to remind me when I abbreviated this as OMW that I guess in the text world that means on my way. So we'll consider it on my way to better opioid prescribing practices. If you wouldn't mind please entering your name in the chat box and the practice you represent. You can find the chat box option at the bottom of the screen. I guess we're kind of jumping around these first few agenda items. At the bottom on the lower left, you can mute yourself, turn your video off, and also open up the chat box. So it just helps us to know who's on because sometimes we only see your phone number. So it's helpful to know and for everyone else to know as well. So for now, I will be sharing my screen. If any of you have things along the way that you would like to share with everyone else, we can make that happen. I just stop sharing and you do share, so you just have to let me know. Are there any other agenda items? I hope you all had a chance to kind of review this in advance. Now, the agenda items include the purpose of this work group. Scroll down here. Review of the survey that we did in the fall. A little bit of discussion on the opioid management metrics. Some general facts about the addiction problem in our nation. We'll just highlight the CDC's general prescribing guidelines for chronic pain, and then talk about some volunteers for future activities and next month's agenda. Anything else anybody wants to add to this right now? You certainly can add along the way, but okay, so let's just jump down then here to the purpose of this OMW. As we've shared with you before, this is a new priority for the Transforming Clinical Practice Initiative, this being helping prescribers of opioids review and hopefully improve upon their current prescribing practices. It's a top priority of the project now, and all of the organizations like ours that have this contract with CMS are doing various things to help their clinicians take a look at their prescribing practices. So that's kind of the first objective, that we all want to commit to at least review your prescribing practices within your practice. Second objective is to review, understand, and adopt or adapt tools that are already available toward improving your prescribing practices. And there are several already available that you can take a look at, tweak, hopefully makes it easy for you to make some improvements upon opioid management. Third objective is to implement a prescribing protocol at each practice and encourage your clinicians to take the pledge. And we'll take a look at this link. Actually, we'll do it right now. This pledge is simply an agreement, and it's by individual clinician, not by practice. That says you're pledging to educate yourselves and your team, ensure persons with opioid use disorder are treated respectfully, leverage and align with existing programs and initiatives to combat opioid misuse. Obviously, there are more details under each of these main things I'm reading. And fourth, to identify and report on successes and best practices and spread within our national TCPI community and other partner communities good stories and practices that you have. It just asks for your name, your practice. You would say VCSQI is your affiliation, that's us, your email, and then you got to do the robot thing, verify you're a real person and submit it. So it really is just that simple. It's taking a pledge that you're going to do what you can as an individual prescriber to help address the opioid issue in the nation. We are working to understand how we know that people have done it who are in our practices. Certainly, if you do, we'd love to hear from you. Just a quick email that you took the pledge. But behind the scenes, somebody behind this pledge form should be able to tell us how our clinicians are accepting the pledge or not. Okay, so back here. And then the last objective, which really gets me to making a point about our work group calls, is to share resources and learn from each other. So in Appendix B, I've listed several resources already, but we'd like this hour every month to really be a discussion and to have all of you speak up, share what you're doing, ask questions. There are no dumb questions as we're all trying to learn and address this crisis. We know some of you are already on the road to pulling your clinicians together and taking a look at how you might standardize the protocol being used by everyone. So I just welcome you to engage in dialogue along this and this next hour and monthly, as well as via email and in between our calls. I don't know everything about this. Eddie doesn't know everything about this. So we really want this to be a discussion and a helpful hour to all of you. Again, if you've just signed on, please let us know you're on by writing your name and the practice you're from in the chat box. Can we have a little feedback about these objectives? Are they clear? Is there anything else that you think we've missed that you'd like to address as we go through the next few months with this work group? Okay, feel free, to write in the chat box, those of you who are on the computer as well, if it's easier for you to just type something in. Okay, well, with no comments at this point, let's just move on, and we'll be addressing these, taking a look at some of them more intensely on a particular call, or hitting on them briefly, each of them briefly in the future. Okay, so reviewing and discussing last fall's initial survey results. It seems strange to have to say last fall already. So of the practices that were enrolled at the time, we had 20 responses. And of those 20, and these were practice responses, not individuals. We wanted a response per practice, which in some cases was a single practitioner practice. But 12 of the 20 practices indicated that there were clinicians who prescribe opioids within their practice. And of those 12, 10 continued to answer the questions that we had. So other than a couple of questions that were more inpatient focused, typically the surgical ones, most questions had a denominator of 10. For those of you who are new on this call today, since we did this survey, we could send it to you again, or you can just make note of the types of questions that we asked. So again, we disseminated these findings already in a newsletter, but I thought it would be helpful to share them again here to kind of ground our discussion. And I think as you, review these, you can see that there really is room for improving, at least in aggregate, throughout the practices that responded here, and potentially you are one of those 9 that does not have a standardized opioid prescribing protocol, or one of those 5 that do not assess the patient's risk for addiction, or one of those 8 that do not have a signed opioid treatment agreement with their patient. So looking at these results, emphasized for us even more that there was an opportunity to learn from each other and to share things that we have access to that might help our enrolled practices take a closer look at this. If you were not able to listen to our first webinar in October on the opioid crisis, that is on our website. We had a webinar that really just offered some highlights from a few different providers, experts in the country. One that Dr. Robert Bales, family practice physician and addiction expert from Cleveland Clinic, spoke about the crisis in general and offered some general guidelines when prescribing opioids. And then Dr. Jared Skiller, he's a PhD psychologist from Michigan State and Spectrum Healthcare in Michigan, spoke briefly about alternatives to prescribing opioids as well. So we only highlighted those things in our first webinar to kind of set the tone for where we are. Any thoughts, reactions, comments about these key findings so far? Any of you want to share in particular where you are with some of these points and activities?
Debbie, this is Steve Dixon. I was interested in the opioid treatment agreement. What exactly is that? That's interesting. And the patients expected to live up to the terms of the agreement, or is the physician supposed to live up to terms of the agreement? And how effective is having such an agreement in place?
That's a good question, and it's one of the things Dr. Skilling actually mentioned on in his comments on that first. You see what I'm going to open here. He stressed the point that we should not be calling these contracts, but rather treatment agreements. And so here, for example, I just received these today from another practice transformation network. Here's one where the patient simply agrees to what is noted. I've got to get these screens out of the way so I can scroll, sorry. So what is noted in this agreement, that they've been prescribed and the goals for improved function, that they're making their, well, you can read as I scroll down this, and we'll post these and send them out to everyone as well. They acknowledge that they know addiction is a risk. So this is one.
So something like that, Debbie, in looking at that format and look, as I was reading it as you were scrolling,
Another one.
That would be a good place to put what your prescribing policies are, correct?
Right.
Words, we won't prescribe over 2 weeks worth of opioids, and then after that we refer you to pain management or something to that effect. I just threw that up.
Yeah, you could add that to something like this as well. In terms of what happens if the patient won't sign it or goes back on what they agreed to do, that's something that your practice will have to discuss. You know, whether they'll continue with prescribing opiates or try something else with that patient, or release the patient from the practice, you know, or refer them elsewhere. That's something that you as a practice will have to decide. But here, this one is a little more straightforward with how it's worded. I agree not to take more medication than prescribed and not to take doses more frequently. I agree to keep it in a safe and secure place. I agree not to share, sell. So they're a little more straightforward in terms of what the patient is agreeing to. And then this would be kept in the patient record. I would recommend that the patient gets a copy as well so they remember what they are agreeing to. So we'll make both of these available. There are other ones, and you can certainly develop your own. But again, as I noted earlier, we've got access to these tools that will help make things maybe easier. You don't have to start from zero. You can see this one actually was from Utah, an example from Utah. So we'll get these out to everyone. Other questions about a treatment plan? I mean, we can spend more time on this and get into more detail about what everyone is doing on a future call. But as you can see, of the 10 that responded to our survey, 80% or 8 did not do this with their patients. Are you working on one already, Steve?
No, I was just looking at that. I was reading as you were scrolling. I like that idea. I'm just trying to think about how to apply that. I think it's a good tool.
Does anyone else who's on the line do something like this?
I do not. I'm Janet Rodriguez. We do not that I know of, but I'm in a totally different department, and I'm going to bring this up with the nursing staff to see if they have anything in place like this so that I'll know in the future.
Janet, do you want to remind the others listening the kind of practice that you have?
Family practice.
Family practice. Yeah, and often it is the primary care physicians who are first approached by their patients. You know, if they've had a procedure and their post-op meds have run out, they might be coming to you for new prescriptions.
Mm-hmm.
Any other
and that's
thoughts?
True.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry.
That's true.
I said, and that's true. You know, we get, you know, a lot of the hospital follow-ups and stuff like that, that we would continue on with their medications for a short period of time, and then we would transfer them over to pain management. But, you know, this form is kind of a good form. I wanted to be able to print that off and show them what I'm talking about. So when you send it to us, we'll do that.
Okay. Any other comments on these findings, whether it's the treatment agreement or one of the other ones? All right, well, we'll be repeating this every so often. We're going to get down to the metrics now. We might not ask all the questions that were included in the first survey, but we will want to know if practices are changing, and certainly as we add more practices. How many practices are we up to now, Eddie? 46?
Yeah, we're about 46 or 47 right now.
Okay. Yeah, since October, we've practically doubled the number of clinicians and number of practices that we have now in our project. So certainly there are many that never saw these survey questions in the first place. Okay, so let's take a look then about at the metrics specifically, and several of these were questions on the survey. I'm going to scroll back here. Oh, this is the list of all of you we contacted and that were invited. But on Appendix C, all part of the agenda, is where we list the metrics that we intend to use on a kind of yes-no basis initially to see how our practices have moved along. First, asking if you have a standardized opioid prescribing protocol. And then the next three, for our purposes in aggregate, we'll simply want to know, are you doing this, yes or no, and or maybe a in development answer choice as well. Evaluating the patient's risk of opioid misuse, conducting follow-up evaluation for those patients who are receiving opiates, and lastly, documentation of a signed opioid treatment agreement. So we'll send out a quick link asking everyone at a set point in time, or perhaps on your weekly calls or bi-weekly calls with Ivan, he'll ask you to just answer them at, you know, maybe the last week of March, we'll ask everybody again or something. But what I want to highlight also is that these last three measures are actually QPP measures on the Quality Payment Program website and are available for your MIPS and APM selection. So if you were to choose any of these measures for that purpose, or even just to begin monitoring for yourself, then you would be collecting patient-level data. We don't want your patient-level data, but should you choose to focus on one of these as an improvement activity, we'd ask for your aggregate rate, knowing that you were collecting it at a patient level. And these could be some of the measures that you're using for 2018. You know, 2017 was the transition year for Quality Payment Program. In 2018, CMS expects to receive data for 6 measures for any clinician who is eligible to participate in the program. So one or all 3 of these could be measures should they pertain to your practice, meaning you prescribe opioids. They might be very easy to start monitoring and improve upon as well. So the links here take you back to detailed information about these measures. Okay. Now, again, at a minimum, we are just going to want to know, yes or no, have you initiated that activity? But should you want to start really measuring it yourself with patients, then these links will be helpful to you to know how to start doing that. Any questions about these measures? Does it sound reasonable to ask you maybe quarterly, yes or no, on whether or not these practices are in place?
This is Janet Rodriguez. I do have a question on these for reporting purposes. These probably can't go on claims, right? Because we do report by claims. And I don't know that these measures would be something that we could do.
Let's take a look. Unless somebody knows the answer to that right off the bat. They're not all listed in order.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go to, I know one of them is at least starts with the word opioid. Here we go. Follow-up evaluation.
I know for family practice there was like 26 of them, but yeah. I didn't see that on there.
This one is a registry. You're right. I think the other one's here, documentation of signed treatment agreement, registry. You're absolutely right. And then, was it follow-up? What did that last one start with? Monitoring?
You're going faster than I can read.
Let's see. Evaluation. That's evaluation of risk. I'm going to guess it's registry also.
There
you go.
Yep. So you're right. That makes an issue for claims. You know, this is a really good point. I'm glad you asked this question because this being such a high priority, it might be worth, you know, bringing the question up with CMS. If they're really interested in this, can't they find a way to make this also submitted via claims? I'm going to make that.
I mean, there could be a counseling code that they could use to do that. Or, you know, if we did counsel somebody on that, we could report it. But I don't see any when I was doing those.
Yeah. It certainly would help practices go along with this high priority, you know?
Correct.
Hey, Debbie, in the previous screen, you were showing the metric number for each one of the, like, not that one, but this was way back where you know how CMS identifies the quality ID number and it finds it and it tells you the numerators and denominators. I thought I saw one of the, I thought I saw one of the, like the quality measure code 414.
Right.
If you pull up that definition, I think that I saw a a code that you can put on a claim. And if there's a code that you can put on a claim, you can at least go ahead and capture those in case CMS says, yes, you can, instead of submit with a registry or a claim, at least you can identify those that you've submitted by that code.
Yeah, it's not on any, the code is not on any of the screens that I've looked at right now. Eddie, I don't know if while we're talking, maybe you can go to the resource library and see if there's any more definition around this that includes codes. You'd still have to code it for a registry, wouldn't you?
Yes, you have to code it for registry, but also,
Yeah.
but there's I think there is a Q code or some kind of code that you can submit in your claims at a zero cost that would identify you did you had them sign the agreement and you had them sign this. It wouldn't be submitted, but if you get CMS to allow claim submission, at least you've got claims out there that where you've documented that code in the claim.
Exactly, yeah. Are you doing this, Eddie? Do you want to share your screen?
Let me take a look at this, and I'll let you know if I have something to share, Deb.
All right, okay. Okay. Back to my first question that prompted Janet to ask about that, though. Does it seem reasonable to, at least on a quarterly basis, ask each of you yes or no, whether you have these functions in place?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, because we certainly would like to see more and more practices implement these strategies. Any other questions? You know, another one that comes to mind for me has to do with whether or not you are reporting to your state drug prescription monitoring program. Is that a topic that we should talk more about at a future meeting? To describe what those are and...
Yeah, because I really don't know what you're talking about with that one. So you could elaborate on that.
Okay. Are any of you involved with your state's drug prescription monitoring program? I think it's prescription drug monitoring program, actually.
Yes, we are.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
In reference to what?
Well, how it's used. Are you using it at all to evaluate or to see whether patients are already taking opioids?
Yeah, whenever we prescribe, whenever we send in a prescription for opiates, we always register that patient through that. If through us, it's New York State PMP, and we put the patient's information in, and then we print the report, and then that gets scanned to the patient's chart. And of course, if there's evidence of overprescribing, then that's something that's brought to the clinician's attention.
Okay.
But we don't prescribe a lot of narcotics, thankfully. So, but when we do use that program.
Is that Victoria speaking?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi. So that's New York. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll put that on a future agenda item then, and maybe show a few. Go to the websites for the state. They're often run out of the state's Board of Pharmacy, actually.
Yeah, once we went to, once the crackdown came, we just automatically initiated that as just part of the protocol of prescribing narcotics. So we've just been doing it for years now.
Oh, important point. So it's part of your prescribing protocol.
Yeah, and not that, honestly, Debbie, not that we've had a written protocol in place, but that was just something, as I've told Ivan before, we never put policies down on paper. It was just something that was initiated. We're a small staff, so, the three of us in the office, that was just what we were going to start doing. And, now, of course, we're having to put policies down on paper.
Right. Well, good for you for being ahead of it early on.
We're trying.
Hey, Debbie, this is Steve Dixon again. And I looked at some of the old measures that we had, and for example, this is going back a couple of discussions ago, but for example, if under measure 414, evaluation or interview for risk of opioid misuses, you can use, if you evaluate a patient for risk or misuse of opiates by using a brief validated instrument or a patient interview at least once during opioid therapy, you can submit a code G9584 on your claim. And that would at least document the fact that you are doing that.
Okay, can you repeat that code?
Yeah, it's G9584. That says that you evaluated the patient. If you didn't evaluate a patient, you can put it, well, which I don't know why you want to put that on there, but it's a G9585. And that's under the CMS, the quality measures for their, it used to be the old PQRS, PQRI, and now it's whatever it is now. But that's quality measure 414. And so there is some codes that you can use to at least document in your claim that you've done that. So if in fact there's a way to submit the fact that you're doing these through either claim or through whatever Medicare may eventually allow, at least you've got them documented, and historically you can go back and run a report based on the G9584.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, Steve. I think we all learned something in the last minute here.
Debbie, I found those on the CMS resource library. I can share those PDFs afterwards. There's also a 9578 for documentation of a signed opioid treatment agreement. I think that's the other one you're talking about, Steve.
Yeah, and that's measure 412.
G9578. Whoops, wrong place.
Yes.
My cursor's moving around.
And for the opioid follow-up, Debbie, it's 9562, looks like.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the G9562.
62.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what we have to find out, what I'll do my best to address, is why these measures can't be submitted via claim. Why they're down strictly as registry measures. Kind of puts a disincentive on using these and reporting them. All right, thank you, Eddie. So you've got the PDFs for all three that we'll send around?
Yeah, I could send those out.
Do you want to, I'm going to let you share your screen for a minute so people know what it is you're going to. Thanks.
So these three, go ahead, Debbie.
No, that's all right. I was going to acknowledge the chat box. Go ahead.
So these three are the measure specifications directly from the CMS website, and they go into pretty painstaking detail on how to define the denominators as well as the numerators over here. Like Steve said, there's a performance met or performance not met code for each one of these. So this is 408, there's 412, and 414. And again, these are all registry only metrics. They don't have claims versions for these. So we'll do some research and figure out why these are not a part of the claim measures.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Eddie. So just want to acknowledge some of the chat that's been going on. Okay, Janelle's you're gonna look into it more. All right, great. All right. That's all helpful to hear. And with the notes from the meeting today and the signed treatment agreement samples, we'll get those PDFs out to everyone as well. I only put a little bit in here about facts of opioid misuse because we have been talking about it, and I chose this particular slide to paste in here, which you'll see you can actually copy and paste it into something else if you want, because this is the data that really suggests that addressing prescribing at the front end could have an impact in our in the national project. Certainly, it's not going to address everything that's going on, all the illegal drugs that are purchased from on the dark internet and from overseas. But when you look at how 55% of abusers said they obtained this free from a relative or friend, could have been a prescription. Almost 5% took it from a friend without asking. 11.5% bought it from a friend, and then 17% had it prescribed. So they're not numbers to really take lightly, and at least trying to keep those that were prescribed at a minimum or safely disposed of is something that we as healthcare professionals can address, and that's exactly why it's become a priority for this project. On the CDC's website, there's a lot of information. If you're putting a presentation together for your staff, and actually we could help you do that if you want, but there are lots of stories, lots of facts, as well as these tools and resources. That October webinar that we did, the slide deck there has some of these types of slides as well that you're welcome to pull from. Looks like somebody else joined, or that's in the chat box, more in the chat box. Oh, okay. All right, so in terms of prescribing protocols, and this might be a topic we want to spend, an entire future call on. It's not really an item we can cover in 5 minutes like I have here. But let me see. There we go. If we go to CDC's website, we can see this is actually in one of their MMWR, their weekly reports. In March of last year, they issued the guideline for prescribing opioids for chronic pain, which is often how this starts with individuals.
Could you send that to us, Debbie, or is that something that you may have
all
already...
you have to do is click on that link in the agenda, and it'll contain in the minutes.
Okay.
So it's kind of lengthy. There's a lot of background here, rationale, scope and audience, how these were developed. Quite a bit on that to justify or validate. So I think it takes a while to actually get to their recommended approach. But as you can see, even 5 minutes wouldn't do this justice for sure, even an hour. So recommendations are grouped into 3 areas for consideration: determining when to initiate or continue opioids for chronic pain, how to select them, including dosage, duration, follow-up, discontinuation, and assessing risk and addressing harms for opioid use. So there are 12 recommendations. We can just click here and look at them quickly. Determining when, and then what to pick and how much, and addressing the risk. So this is really the meat of it. Everything beforehand kind of tells you how they got to it and validates their process for coming up with these recommendations. So as you begin to consider an opioid prescribing protocol, you might want to take a look at these and see if you're covering these points. Now here is, in their second box, interpretation of recommendation categories and evidence type. So again, this is justifying the recommendations themselves. Who was on the group, etc. So yeah, that link, it's exactly what I clicked on. The link in the agenda will take you right to this spot. And I think it's a helpful list of recommendations to consider as you start to look at what your practice might do. Are any of you on the phone already working on this or have a standardized protocol for your either clinicians or single practitioner to use?
Again, I'm not sure. I have to go to the people in the right areas to find out what they've worked on and what they're doing.
Okay.
Debbie, we do not. I tell you, but the survey really opened our eyes at the differences that we had in our prescribing patterns for the opioids. And our nurses are really interested. We're going to meet with Ivan February the 8th or 9th, somewhere in there, and start coming up with a process and a policy on a standardized policy for opioid prescriptions. So we're going to work on that.
Stephen, are you comfortable with sharing a little bit more about how it opened your eyes, how many prescribers you have, and
well,
what you mean?
Yeah, we don't have that many prescribers. We've got 6 prescribers, and every one of them prescribes something under different modalities. And so I haven't had a chance to sit down and talk with the doctors on that, but I did sit down and talk with the nurses, and they knew, you know, they're aware of the prescribing policy. So we had a nice talk earlier this week on the coming up with a standardized process for doing that. And one of the thoughts and suggestions of the nurses was that once we come up with an opioid policy, is that we make that part of every patient's in processing, if you will, package. You know, in case they ever do get prescribed or come in, we just let them know up front what our opioid prescribing policy is as part of the initial package for patients. So I think that and the nurses had some good ideas on what to work with. So I'm excited about Ivan coming and us sitting down and starting that discussion.
Great. Yeah, I just learned, he just told me yesterday he's got a date to come visit you. Remember, the rest of you on the call, we do have travel funds in our budget, so sometimes an on-site visit might be what is needed for a practice, not just for this, but for any of the activities you're working on. And at this point, Ivan's the man, so you'd be scheduling with him to try and arrange an on-site visit. So Steve, I'm glad that it's working out for him to come see your group.
Yes, me too.
All right. So I think it's probably, this is probably a topic that we'll devote one of the future meetings to. And maybe, you know, we'll take a little poll at the end in the chat box and see which topic you want to address next. That would be at the end of February. And in the meantime, we certainly can send other information around. So, next agenda item has to do with some volunteers. We do want to form a subgroup to work on post-op opioid prescribing guidelines for cardiothoracic surgery patients. As some of you know, the genesis of VCSQI was in the cardiothoracic surgery field in Virginia. And so we have a particular interest in this specialty area, and also know that there is no national set of prescribing guidelines. There are none for cardiothoracic surgery patients. So the Society of Thoracic Surgeons has expressed interest in working with us to at least come up with a standardized set of guidelines for this specialty area. I don't know, Steve, I know you're a CT surgery practice, of course. I don't think any of the rest of you who are on right now represent CT surgery, but FYI, we'll be reaching out to those practices to see if we can't form a little subgroup. We are meeting with members, with some staff people from STS next week, to talk about the process that they go through to have a proposed set of guidelines approved. So that would be a great contribution that our practices could make to the nation. Secondly, we'd really like to bring forward to the rest of the TCPI community success stories from those of you who have accomplished some improvement in your prescribing practices. So what's included in one of, I think it's the last, no, actually I sent it separately with the agenda, is this template. I copy pasted this, as you see from the beginning here, from an online link. So it didn't transfer completely the way it would look online, but I wanted you to get a sense of what are the questions that would be asked. I was actually surprised some of the drop downs actually copy pasted. So, you know, you would pick that you work with us. Does this story describe the work of a single practice, a system, or community practice? Or maybe you're working within your community to do something, or part of a health system. You put your practice name, location, etc. And then really just describe what was your goal and what has been done. What have you implemented? So it's really quick to fill this out. Now, accomplishing this might take, you know, a couple of months to actually be able to have a story to tell. But we wanted to bring it to your attention so that you can have it in mind. And maybe there's already things you've done that you would like to share with us that we can share outside of VCSQI and with CMS that, you know, complements and supports the good work that you've done, so that it's I don't want to call it marketing, but it's a great way to promote the work that your practice has done. So periodically, Ivan might be asking you about this, or we'll remind you again, maybe when we do the 4-question survey every quarter. Do you have a story to tell us yet? And of course, our contacts with each of you regularly will also let us know that you're making progress in these various areas. So, and we'll help you do it. You know, you can play with those answers on the Word document, and then going online to enter it. Your answers is actually the way the story is submitted. So that, except for now talking about our next meeting, that covers the discussion items for today. So is there anything else anybody wants to comment on before we kind of get to planning next month's meeting? Any other thoughts that our discussion has generated so far?
Debbie, this is Steve again, and this is purely, I don't know that it's off topic, but it's something that, as we're talking the opioid prescriptions and policies and abuses and so forth over the last month, two or 3 months that we've been discussing, that you and I and Eddie and Ivan, it really, in the last 3 weeks, we've had 3 of our surgeons that had patients that came back to our office for a 2nd and 3rd time redo valve replacement because of IV drug abuse from heroin and from the opioid epidemic. And these patients, and when I'm talking 2nd and 3rd time redos, this is within a 6-month, 7-month period that these patients were coming in for those redos. So it caused me a little bit of angst to think about, well, what really is the or what are we seeing with regards to that? And so I ran a list of the patients that we treated and did surgery on over the past 2 years with a primary diagnosis of endocarditis. And we did 147 procedures, surgical procedures on patients with endocarditis. But of that 147, a lot of them had endocarditis because of infected pacemaker leads and so forth and whatnot. But what was interesting is that the majority or not majority, but 33 of those patients had tricuspid repairs. And what I found is that there's definitely a correlation between the tricuspid repairs and the IV drug abuse. So I thought that was interesting, and the fact that in looking at all of those 33 patients that had the tricuspid repairs and tricuspid surgeries, I've got to do a little bit further research to see that they all were indicated as IV drug abusers. But of the 33 of those patients, 26 of those patients were either insured with Medicaid or uninsured. So I'm trying to, as I look at this, I'm trying to think about, is there something that we could possibly talk about from you all's perspective and project as far as how to medically, ethically, legally, and talent-wise look at these patients and come up with a policy, perhaps either with the STS, CMS, or something else that would allow us to continue maybe to treat these patients, but maybe instead of post-operatively going to a cardiac rehab, they have to go to a drug rehab. Mm-hmm. As we start, and all of this is triggered off by the fact that as we looked earlier in the conversation, we were looking at the contract or the agreement that the patients are signing on the opioid prescriptions. And, you know, I was just taking it a little step further to see if there's something that we could work at this level on a standard for taking care of these IV drug abusers who are non-compliant and are costing the system millions, if not billions of dollars for the second and third time redos within a period of a year of each other. So I'll just bring that up, not that we need an answer, not that we need to do anything, but I think that looking at the numbers that we're seeing in our small practice of 150, and then I'm going to look at every one of those records to see how many were drug abusers and then or IV drug abusers, and then see how many what if they were redos, it was first time, et cetera, et cetera. But I've got a lot more work to do on that. But that's 150 over a 2-year period is a large volume.
Yeah, and you know, I think one of our Virginia members of the original VCSQI has brought this issue up as well. And so I think it's very important, and we should put it on the subgroup discussion activity. It's not that you're prescribing them, it's that the patient was and continues to be an addict.
Correct.
Yeah.
And non-compliant post-operatively. Right.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. I think we should include it in the subgroup discussion. Absolutely. Okay, so can we have some kind of either verbal or a chat box vote on what to tackle in February? It seems like maybe establishing how to establish a standardized protocol and components of it might be the best first topic, but I would really like to know more from those of you who are on it, on the call. Mm-hmm. And if you don't say, then Eddie and Ivan and I are just going to have to decide the order.
Well, for me, this is Steve. I think for me, the establishing a standardized prescribing protocol would be the top priority for us. You know, I think that once we get something set up where we have a standard in-house that we can share with our physicians, and we can do that's my vote.
Anyone else?
When is lunch? From 1 to 2 today or something?
I mean, the rest of these kind of follow, don't they?
Yeah.
I'm reading them. That's just, I don't think I have anything else to offer. You know, we don't prescribe that much, but this is interesting, and I certainly would like to put in place some of this stuff. But, yep, that's it.
Okay. All right, well, we'll summarize the discussion today, probably just right within this agenda. So the material that's in the agenda will also be there in the minutes, the links and such, and the attachments in the back. Please feel free to share any of this with your clinicians, as well as other staff who might be involved in any changes that might be occurring on these in opioid management. And so I guess that concludes it for today. Our next meeting, and you should all still have this series of meetings on your calendar. I sent it out as a series for monthly meetings. Tried to make it a different day and a different end of the month than the person and family engagement work group, which I know might be some of you the same people. So we staggered that a little bit so as not to put it all in 1 week and on one day. All right, Eddie, any closing comments, or Ivan? Okay.
No,
well,
just
thanks
everyone for being on the line today.
Thank you all. Good job.
All right. We'll
Thank
stay
you.
in touch with us. Email anything that you've had, any thoughts you've had afterwards. We're here.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
That was good.